Hi everyone. In today's presentation, we're going to talk about ABCs and functions of behavior. This presentation was created by Dr. Jason Hurst. Dr. Hurst has a bachelor's of science in psychology, a master's degree in applied behavioral analysis, and a PhD in behavioral psychology. He has been working with children on the autism spectrum since 2011 and has extensive experience working as an educator for children and adults with and without developmental disabilities. Let's get started. During this presentation, we will be looking at the behavioral perspective on behavior challenges and how it differs from the traditional thinking about why behavior challenges occur. We will also discuss how we group behaviors into groups according to the common reasons they occur. Those groups are based on the purpose of behavior, or what behavior analysts refer to as the function of the behavior. Think about a behavior that has been problematic for you, either something you're struggling with right now or something you've encountered in the past. What did those behaviors look like? Challenging behavior can take all kinds of forms. An important consideration is that what a behavior looks like doesn't necessarily make it problematic. Rather, the challenge arises when the behavior occurs under the wrong circumstances. There are appropriate times to cry or yell or laugh or fidget, but all of these can be considered problematic when they occur in inappropriate contexts. Of course, some other behaviors are almost always problematic, like aggression or self injury. What these behaviors have in common is that they are occurring for a reason. That reason is not always obvious and is actually often counterintuitive. Taking the behavioral perspective helps us identify the causes of these behaviors so that we can better design solutions to address them. The behavioral perspective we will share with you is based on decades of research from the laboratory to schools, homes, and the community. This way of thinking comes more naturally to some compared to others, and for many is strongly counterintuitive to the way you've been trained to think about behavior, motivation, and intention for your whole life. However, changing the way we think about behavior helps us to remove our personal biases and ineffective thinking from the equation so that we can focus on the things we can actually change. All behaviors, whether they are problematic or appropriate, occur for a reason. That reason is not always obvious, but we can learn why behaviors occur by looking at what they accomplish. That is, the behavioral perspective focuses on what's happening around the person while the behavior is happening, rather than focusing on things that are happening internally. For example, we would want to see whether the behavior is helping the person get something they want, such as the attention of a friend, peer, or caregiver. Or maybe the behavior helps the individual fulfill a need or want they're experiencing, like gaining access to a preferred toy, a treat, or something else. Or perhaps the behavior helps the individual reduce or escape something unpleasant or effortful. Or maybe the behavior is just fulfilling empty space in an otherwise boring and understimulating environment. These are all things we can actually do something about, compared to attributing behaviors to internal things we can't change, like emotions, personality traits, or dispositions. The focus on external and observable causes of behavior is largely based on practicality. We can't reach inside someone and change who they are. But the labels we use to describe a person's trait are not really the causes of the behavior in the first place, because we only apply those labels after the behavior has already occurred. Labels are useful for describing things, but they don't tell us about the conditions that led to us applying those labels. Calling someone mad is just really another way of saying that you're observing them getting flushed, breathing heavily, tensing up, and maybe yelling or pouting. These observable behaviors are not actually occurring because the person is mad. We apply the label of mad to people engaged in these behaviors. This pattern of thinking is called circular reasoning. Let's look at another example. Let's say that we see someone crying. We might ask ourselves, why are they crying? We are often tempted to make an attribution to a feeling or a mental state, like being upset. However, what is being upset other than a shorthand description of what we've already observed? We only know that they are upset because we've observed them crying. Identifying upset feelings as the cause of crying doesn't tell us anything about what made the person upset, so we can't do anything with that information. Let's look at this another way. The behavioral perspective tells us to look at what is happening both before and after the behavior occurs. What was going on at the time? What conditions were in place? What did the person do? And did anything change as a result of the behavior? Maybe they were hungry and feeling discomfort. In the past, they may have learned that crying tends to get the attention of a caregiver who then attends to their needs. If crying leads to getting a snack, then crying served the purpose of taking care of a current need. Infants learn this pattern very early on. An infant can't ask mom for food, or to be changed, or to be put down for a nap. They lack the communication skills to ask for anything in particular. Their earliest communication tool is to cry, which usually results in caregivers trying different things until the need is met. Over time, infants learn to communicate more efficiently by establishing different patterns of crying or using gestures and eventually word sounds and whole words. Children with developmental delays may not progress as smoothly through these stages of communication, and they may continue to engage in a variety of behaviors in order to communicate what they want or need. Even if the child knows how to speak, they may have learned that engaging in more problematic forms of behavior gets them what they want or need faster or more reliably than using words. The way to determine whether a behavior is actually an attempt to communicate is to look at the behavior in context. We call this context the ABCs of behavior. ABC stands for antecedent, behavior, and consequence. The term antecedent means before, and these events include anything that happens before the behavior or any condition that is in place before or during the behavior. The behavior is, of course, whatever the person is doing. And finally, consequences are any events or changes to the antecedent condition that occur immediately after the behavior. The word consequence sometimes has a negative meaning associated with it. We say things like, there will be consequences, when those consequences are assumed to be unpleasant or punitive. However, in this context, we use consequences more neutrally to mean anything that happens, whether good or bad. When two things are in a special relationship where one thing happening is dependent on something else happening first, we call that relationship a contingency. Think cause and effect, or if this, then that. Lots of things we encounter fall into this kind of relationship. When you go to use a vending machine, getting your snack is contingent upon putting enough money in first and pressing the correct buttons. Whenever a behavior we are interested in falls into this type of relationship with a given consequence, that information can tell us a lot about why the behavior is occurring. You don't put money into a vending machine to be charitable to the company that owns the machine. You get something in return. The same can be applied to other behaviors. A consequence that follows a behavior can have one of three impacts on that behavior. The first thing that might happen is the behavior results in something productive or desirable for the person. We might say that engaging in that behavior worked out for the person. When a behavior produces a desirable outcome, you might learn that if you want to produce that same outcome again in the future, you should repeat that same behavior. We describe this change as a strengthening or reinforcing of the behavior. A second outcome is that the behavior produces an unpleasant or undesirable outcome. In this case, the behavior might become less likely to occur again in the future because we would want to avoid encountering that unpleasant outcome again. We call this a weakening or punishing effect. A third outcome might be that the consequence has no effect on the likelihood of the behavior occurring again. One thing that can make looking for these relationships between consequences and behaviors difficult is that any given consequence might not follow a behavior every single time, like in the vending machine example. If the machine is in good working order, it should deliver your snack every time you make a selection. However, the world we live in is rarely that consistent. Sometimes you have to try and try again to get the outcome you were hoping for. Sometimes you get away with behaviors that would normally get you into trouble. So we have to look at the relationship between a behavior and its consequences over a period of time. We ask what usually happens after the behavior. Given what usually happens, are we seeing that behavior continues to occur? Is it happening more frequently over time? Or is it gradually fading away in favor of some other behavior that is more effective at meeting the same need? A useful way to examine why a given behavior occurs is to look at the consequences that follow it and group different kinds of consequences together. We're going to focus on the kinds of consequences that reinforce or strengthen behaviors rather than those that reduce behaviors for now. Behavior analysts group consequences together by two pairs of categories. First, we look at what happened in the environment, whether something was added that wasn't there before, or whether something that was present before the behavior was removed. When a consequence involves the addition of something, we categorize it as positive. When a consequence involves something being removed or going away, we call it negative. Not very intuitive, I know. It's very common for folks to assume that positive consequences are good and negative consequences are bad. But bear with me though. When we talk about positive consequences, think addition. And when we talk about negative consequences, think subtraction. The second pair of categories is based on whether the consequence involves the action of other people or not. When a consequence is dependent on the action of another person, we call it a social consequence. Sometimes, though, our behavior can produce changes in our circumstances without other people around, or the changes are at least not dependent on anyone helping us out. Those consequences are called non-social. At least that difference is more intuitive. When we apply each one of these two categories to a consequence, we get 4 different options. We can have social consequences where another person either adds something, positive, or removes something, negative. And we can have non-social consequences that can be positive or negative. Let's take a look at some examples of each. Before we dive in, let's first address an important aspect of applying the behavioral perspective. Being a science, behavior analysis emphasizes looking at things objectively. That means we have to set aside our intuition about what a given consequence should do to a behavior and focus instead only on what we can actually see happening. We will give some examples of how a consequence that you would think would weaken or punish a behavior might actually make that behavior more likely to occur again. Any event mediated by another person that involves adding something that wasn't there before is called a social positive consequence. We're focusing on consequences that strengthen behavior in this presentation, so we can further describe these as social positive reinforcers. Common examples include gaining someone's attention. As humans, we tend to appreciate attention from others, either by itself or because we need the other person's attention before we can gain other things. Attention can take lots of forms, including eye contact, facial expression, someone getting closer to us, or active interactions. When we have someone's attention, we might also manage to gain access to things they have control over, like our favorite toys, snacks, or fun activities. Finally, we might also gain the option to choose and exert control or influence over our environment, which is often rewarding. Let's check in on some counterintuitive examples. Many parents and teachers might resort to reprimands as a way to get rid of problematic behavior. However, we have found that for some individuals, any form of attention can be rewarding, especially when attention has been hard to come by. Just because you might have intended the consequences to weaken the behavior doesn't necessarily mean it will have that effect. If a reprimand is what usually happens after the behavior and it continues to occur, then we have to consider that being reprimanded might be the actual purpose of the behavior. Our interactions with other people don't always serve the purpose of producing something. Sometimes we want to get rid of something unpleasant or difficult, and we need someone else's help to do that. We can become quite skilled at avoiding things we don't like or escaping from situations that have already arrived. When we are successful at removing ourselves from these undesirable situations, then whatever we did to accomplish that becomes more likely to occur again. Even though we call these consequences negative, the outcome is still a strengthening of our behavior. Some common examples of these social negative reinforcers include escaping or avoiding effortful demands or tasks, or removing unwanted attention or social interactions with others. Some consequences can be produced without the help of another person. You need another person to be there to give you attention, but you can do a lot of other things with your surroundings and circumstances on your own. Any event that produces some kind of stimulation that has the result of strengthening your behavior is classified as a non-social positive reinforcer. We all engage in fidgeting when we're bored. The taste of some delicious food rewards going to the fridge to get a snack. And playing an instrument with skill can produce beautiful music. There are lots of ways we engage in our environment to produce outcomes we find pleasing. Finally, non-social negative reinforcers involve removing some form of unpleasantness from our environment without relying on the action of other people. Think taking an aspirin or another pain reducer when you have a headache, turning down a stereo that's too loud, or opening windows to air out a foul smell. Although those were formal ways behavior analysts classify consequences, when we're looking at specific behavior, we often use more common terms to describe the purpose or function of that behavior. Non-social consequences are often referred to as sensory consequences. You may hear behaviors referred to as self-stimulation, stimming, stereotyped behaviors, or even automatically reinforced behaviors, referring to the idea that it's the behavior itself that produces the reinforcer rather than the action of another person. Behaviors that produce social negative reinforcers are often referred to as escape maintained or avoidance behaviors. Within social positive reinforcers, we often distinguish between behaviors that serve to gain some kind of attention and behaviors that serve to gain access to something more tangible. So, to summarize, challenging behaviors can occur because they accomplish something. A behavior can be understood to be attention seeking, escape maintain, attempts to gain access to things, or simply a form of self stimulation seeking to alleviate boredom, anxiety, or some other sensory need. Most of the time, we are able to meet our needs and get things we want through socially acceptable forms of behavior. However, when we encounter barriers of getting what we want, the form of our behavior can change. Think about that last time a vending machine didn't give you that snack you were craving right away. Maybe you yelled at it, maybe you hit the glass, maybe you lost your composure, at least a little. It's frustrating when something we try that usually works out doesn't produce the outcome we're hoping for. When problematic behaviors are occurring with your child, perhaps you can draw some parallels. Maybe they tried other ways to meet their needs that didn't work out right away. Also, it could be the case that the problematic behavior stems from a communication delay where they're still stuck in the same situation as the infant who only knows how to cry to get what they need. As we have explored, all behavior that continues to occur must accomplish something, even if it's not entirely obvious. We use the objective method of looking into the ABCs of behavior, what's happening before and after the behavior, to determine what the cause is. With this information and the expertise of our highly trained and talented clinicians, we can identify functional skills to teach, remove barriers to development, and make meaningful differences in the quality of life of our clients. If you are struggling with challenging behaviors, a board certified behavior analyst can help you shed light on what might be causing those challenges and help design solutions. Look for more helpful strategies in this series, and please let us know if there's any topic we've missed. We hope this presentation on ABCs and functions of behavior was helpful for you. If you still have questions about this topic or you'd like more information about our therapy programs, please visit our website where you can schedule a free consultation with one of our clinicians. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.